Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Pleasantville. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and Designated Pilot Examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic as always. So we've dreaded it for years, all 4+ of our time together, that we would screw up a recording, and we've done pretty dang good for the first 150 plus. But last week we had our first unrecoverable glitch where you stopped recording at the 28-minute mark, and we talked for another 20 minutes. So sorry to those out there that were on pins and needles to hear the rest of part 1 of the instrument mock check ride, but we are ready to go. We're going to finish up all of part 1 today. We thought we would make a long 2-part series, but I think now we're going to make it a 3-part series, just like we did the private, and cover all the aspects of the ACS for the instrument check ride with a flight school owner and a DPE who's going to give you all the secrets. But those secrets are already published, Wally, are they not, in the ACS?
They are published. Every one of them is published. It's right in front of your fingertips if you choose to download the document or buy the document.
And it's really funny because we've talked about this forever. I heard instructors recently trying to give their play-by-play of a check ride, and they all they really can do is repeat how their check ride went. They've not done 1,000 check rides like you have done. And assuming your weighting's about what the training world weighting is, I assume most are private, and then a good meaty chunk, 20 to 30% of those are instrument check rides. And so you've probably done 300-400 instrument check rides. There's not a single individual that's going to be the applicant on 300 or 400 instrument check rides. So if you tuned into this show, you have the horse's mouth right here telling us what we need to be prepared for a check ride, and there are no gimmicks. This is an open book test. And we got through really areas of operation 1A, B, and a little bit of C, but we're going to jump in at areas of operation pre-flight planning, which is number 1, and we're going to jump into cross-country flight planning after we finished up last week talking a little bit about onboard weather and the things that were going to be asked of you by a designated pilot examiner as it relates to onboard weather in your iPad. It's delayed. Know that stuff. Be prepared to be able to speak to it if you're using an electronic flight bag. But here you've asked me to prepare a flight plan to Tulsa. I have included a fuel stop, and we're going over my cross-country flight plan, and I got to assume you're going to ask me to share it with you and my thoughts around it, but walk me through. We're in that room. What's it like? What's my next step as this oral portion of the check ride continues?
Well, I'm going to ask you where we're going. Again, if you plan to go nonstop and it works, that's fine. If you plan a fuel stop, I'll ask you where we're going to. And I will then ask you what your filed routing is and what your altitude is, and we'll start that as a starting point. You may file it. I don't know. What a lot of people will do is they'll say, "Well, I filed all Victor Airways and VORs," and usually I say, "Why?" And they, a lot of people say, "Well, I thought you'd want to see that." And I said, "Well, I don't. I just want you to file. I want you to file it. I've said this hundreds of times, but I want you to file it like you would file it if you were taking your family to Tulsa tomorrow. If you wouldn't do VORs and Victor Airways, that's fine. It's just whatever works for you, because I guarantee when I give you a clearance, it's not going to be what you filed. So, we're going to talk about the differences. We're going to talk a lot about the mechanics of just filing a flight plan. the problem that we get to with instrument flight is when you're working toward your instrument. If we want to be technical, you cannot be pilot and command on an IFR flight plan because you don't have an instrument rating at this point. So, a lot of people their instructors will file the flight plan, and I'm not sure what good that does, but I mean, if I'm going to work with someone and talk to them or teach them how to file a flight plan, I'm going to have them actually hitting the keys and entering the information in whatever format they use to file the flight plan. Now, when it gets down the PIC name, of course, we're going to put my name in there because I have to be the pilot in command. But, it's filing a flight plan on ForeFlight or, again, whatever EFB you happen to use is a really simple process. I'll tell a funny story. A good friend of mine, another fellow airline pilot, friend of mine, about a year ago, I took him for a ride in one of my when I had my 172, and he got infected by the general aviation bug. And he went out and he ended up buying an airplane, and he's very much into it. But about a year ago, he just got his airplane out of the shop, did a major avionics upgrade, and he calls me up one day. He says, "Hey, he says, you're going to have to teach me how to do something." I go, "What's that?" And he goes, "You're going to have to teach me how to file an IFR flight plan using ForeFlight." And I had to kind of snicker because here's a major airline pilot asking me that, and I said, "Well," I said, "you go in, you enter the information, and you hit enter." And he was kind of flabbergasted because back in the day, back when we came up 40 years ago, you had to call a guy up on a telephone, or you had to go into a flight service station and hand him a piece of paper. It was a little bit more involved than just hitting enter the way it is now.
And I give a ton of credit to my instructors that I had. Justin Meeks, if you're out there listening, you did me well. I can remember calling many times on the phone with him, and we just used his name. When they asked me, I'm making the phone call, and we're talking through the components of a flight plan. As I answered their questions, when they got to who is the pilot, I just used his name and phone number. And I always kind of felt like I was fraudulent doing that. But as you said, he was the pilot in command. But I got to do the steps on the phone call, calling a weather briefer, filing the flight plan. And this was at the precipice of ForeFlight. And I don't even know if you could have filed it in ForeFlight when I first got my instrument rating. But we would have never done that because those fundamental steps of walking through the flight plan checklist, where are you starting? Where are you going? What equipment do you have on board? What's your alternate? All those steps are really what's in ForeFlight. And I think if we shortcut that, we give up too much as a pilot and not knowing how to do it the right way.
Yeah.
Now, I file a flight plan in ForeFlight and hit enter and get my weather briefing there. But I would still say 8 out of 10 flights, I'm calling the weather briefer still. I want that person to be talking to me. I want them to be giving me, don't go east there. Think there's a big storm. All that information is better than just looking at green and red and pink dots in ForeFlight. So those fundamentals are key for sure. And if you're not doing it with your students, you're doing a disservice to those students. But let them be able to do it so they can talk to Wally about the steps to do it for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's a generational thing a little bit. I just not too long ago, within this year, I finally for the first time made a cash deposit at an ATM, and it was like, wow, that was really cool. It works. It works just great. I would always wait for the bank to open and go through the drive-through and hand it to, or, put it in a little tube and send it in. And, I don't know. I think the younger generation today is perfectly fine with making a cash deposit using an ATM, but it's there is something to be said to talking to somebody, because you might miss that NOTAM that the glide slope on the ILS in your destination is out of service, and maybe the only approach is to a runway that is not favoring the wind. So, especially in a situation where you're going from one airport to another and you're making a fuel stop, you don't really care where the fuel stop is. You're just kind of picking sort of a convenient halfway spot. But, if there's something in the NOTAM that you missed, maybe another airport might make more sense. And that's where the human touch is pretty good.
Well, like we said too, I'm not going to do 400 instrument check rides. I'm not the weather briefer who talks all day on the phone about weather and has seen every possible scenario ever probably in the last 5 years as they've given weather briefings. So that little bit of extra skill is always going to be helpful for sure. And while I hate to say, but you showed your age and unfortunately my age, kids don't use cash at all anymore.
Oh, I know.
My kids don't know what cash is. They know what Venmo is,
right?
But they do not know what cash is. Every time I take my daughter to the airport and drop her off for a business trip, I give her $40 just to make sure she has some cash, because you might have to tip someone and they might not have a QR code to tip them, right? So
yeah,
it's crazy.
It's funny. I had a young man for a check ride today. He was probably 20, and I don't know how it came up, but I know we were talking about signing the pages of a logbook, and I used the analogy of, if I bought a car from you and gave you a check that was unsigned, would you be happy with that? And he said, "Oh, no, I wouldn't." I said, "Well, yeah, it's kind of the same concept." And I looked over at him and I said, "Have you ever written a check?" And he thought for a while and he said, "No, I haven't. Never written a check."
Wow. So we're looking through my cross-country plan. You've asked me some questions. I don't know the route between here and Tulsa and if there is special use airspace, but I assume that's where we're going to probably have some conversations about military areas, restricted areas, special use airspace. How do you incorporate that into your conversation?
Well, I talk to people and I say, we end up talking about filing IFR makes things so much easier, because ATC will protect you from all those special use airspaces. When I file IFR, typically I file direct. I just I'm going from my home airport to the new airport that I'm going to, and I just say direct. And a couple hours before the flight, you'll get an email with an expected routing. Now, that expected routing is very seldom direct, but now I know what ATC wants me to do. So, or I know what I'm expecting. And again, my home airport is an uncontrolled airport, so I have to call on the phone to clearance delivery and get my clearance. But MOAs, they're going to keep you clear of MOAs. Restricted areas or any kind of special use airspace, TFRs, they're going to keep you clear of that. Now, does that mean that you should just not pay attention to it? No. I mean, I think you should still pay attention to it. But one of the many beauties of filing IFR is they take care of that. The other thing, the IFR flight plan, you're going to get reminded to close it. And if you land at a controlled airport, when you land, your flight plan automatically gets closed. You don't have to remember, oh my gosh, I'm driving home, I gotta call and cancel my VFR flight plan. So a lot of the burden, I mean, it's just easier. It's just so much easier.
So all that stuff's knowledge that you could ask an applicant about. And then we get to the skills section, and you need to see us exhibit some things. So that's all that we've already talked about with the flight plan: prepare, present, and explain all the cross-country stuff. I might get a problem that I have to recalculate fuel based on the evaluator scenario. Is there a common scenario that you like to give, or you think DPEs give to their applicants, that they would have to figure out that fuel?
Yeah, well, I'm going to give them a less direct routing than what they filed for, and that's where we talk about, especially if going from Houston to Tulsa. I don't know the exact distance, but it's kind of on the edge of the range of maybe a Cherokee or a 172. So I might give them something that is 80 miles longer, or a different altitude, or something to where they're going to have to think about the fuel element of that. Okay, well, maybe I can't go nonstop, or maybe I need to go to make a different fuel stop. But we're just going to talk about that kind of stuff and figure out what works today. And I do like to use it on current, real-time weather.
Perfect. So a few other skill items in that section. We're going to probably cover all of those items. Now we're going to move to area of operation part 2, the pre-flight procedures. You're going to just ask me about the systems, I'm assuming, at this point. There's got to be some knowledge that I need to understand. I can remember being a young to aviation pilot, thinking about all the failures of a pitot-static system. We've done many shows on this stuff, but as a pro like you are, you're wanting the pilot to be knowledgeable what's going to break and what are the common errors, right? You're not seeking out to trick them and catch them. You just want to make sure they know what's going to happen. Yeah,
absolutely. And and it's going to be dependent on what equipment is installed in the airplane that we're using. I mean, if we are flying in a airplane, it has a vacuum system. We're going to talk about vacuum pump failures and how it would affect us, what instruments it would affect, but more so, we're going to talk about recognition and how you would recognize a vacuum pump failure. And I've said it many times on this show. That could be tricky. It could be tricky recognizing a vacuum pump failure because you don't get a big red light flashing. You might, depending on the airplane, but most airplanes are not. And most airplanes, the suction gauge or the vacuum gauge is well out of your field of view. I mean, it ought to be like right in front of you, but for whatever reason, they're usually not.
And they're always small, right? Like you would think that should be like one of the big dials. That should be the size of the airspeed indicator, but it's normally a dime tucked in a corner with only one little square of green that makes you feel comfortable. So we talk about the systems. We talk, again, more about ice, I'm assuming, pitot heat. If that fails and the pitot-static system gets clogged in either side, we're going to talk through that stuff. So we need to be familiar with those failures and what would happen and how we would recognize it. The de-icing, or what's in a 172 that helps me de-ice the aircraft. Do students struggle with that? I know there's not just one, and many people think there's just one. Do you talk about that?
Yeah, I do. I'll say, well, tell me what kind of anti-icing or de-icing equipment we have in this airplane. And usually it's, we got pitot heat, and we usually have a defroster. And, we might have, if it's a carbureted airplane, we're going to have some carburetor heat. But that's usually about it.
And I think of the defrosting being the one that probably most people forget about, right? If we get ice on the windshield, that could be a real big problem. But we have something that could help us there. And then carb heat, we think of it normally during landing purposes, but it is something that could help us en route as well if we were having a problem. Yeah. So we've done all that. We've talked about the flight instruments. We've talked about vacuums. We've talked about the ram air. We've talked about the pitot system. Now we move into the next piece of the ACS, which is the instrument flight deck check.
All right, let's go back to systems just a little bit. One thing that I am going to talk about is just tagging on to that vacuum pump failure. If we were to lose our DG, our directional gyro, how are we going to know where we're going? Of course, and the answer is the compass. If we have one, we have some airplanes that don't have one, but we'll talk a little bit about compass errors. I'm not gonna get, we're not gonna get way down in the weeds about that. But a lot of people struggle with this. I will ask them. I'll say, when is the compass 100% accurate? And most people will say straight and level flight. And that's not the whole answer. And it's the whole answer is straight and level unaccelerated flight. Other than that, the compass is kind of a guide. It gets you in the ballpark. But and then we may talk about time turns and why is that turn coordinator? Why is it called a 2-minute time coordinator? And I literally remember my father talking to me about this one time. He said, "Why is it called a 2-minute time coordinator?" And I guess correctly. And I go, "Oh, it takes 2 minutes to go all the way around." Yeah, okay. And then I did 360 divided by 120, and I said, that's 3 degrees per second. And that was very much a light bulb moment in my life. I mean, I can remember many times working, probably more so on my instrument instructor rating than my instrument rating, but we're on a heading of 060, and the instructor says, okay, turn left heading 360, and I was able to say, okay, that's 60 degrees. 60 divided by 3 is 20. It's a 20-second turn. Of course, we're partial panel. We got everything covered up. So, I put the thing on the mark and fly a standard rate turn for 20 seconds and level the wings, and then kind of take a look up at the compass and make adjustments accordingly. But, I had was very successful making turns like that with just using time turns. But you got to be able to do mental math. So sometimes that's a bit of a challenge.
It's probably been a couple of years, but there's a show on that somewhere on our podcast as well, right?
Yep.
So we get to the airplane, and let's just assume there's a DME in the airplane. We also have a Garmin 430 that's WAS enabled, and the DME is marked inoperative. Are you going to ask any questions about that?
Yeah, I mean, and we probably would have covered that before we even made it out there, because one thing I always ask is, does everything in the airplane work? And, by and large, people will say yes, but sometimes we get out there and it's not so yes.
Yeah, I own a flight school. Remember, there's a lot of broken stuff from time to time.
Yeah.
And it's, again, normally it's not required equipment, but there is a process. There is an advisory circular on how to manage that and how to deal with that stuff. And
yeah.
I think we're all probably a little weak in that because we don't do it every day. We don't manage it every day. We're probably better at it right around check rides, but it's a big part of what we do. And
I think what maybe where there's a little bit of a deficiency, if you will, when we talk about inoperative equipment, and this goes back to the private pilot level as well. I mean, we'll talk about something in the airplane not working, and I'll say, okay, so we determined that this nav light is not working. We're going during the day. It's not required equipment. What do? Just get in the airplane and go? And most people will say, oh, no, it needs to be written up. It needs to be documented. And the thing that most people get, but I sometimes have to dig a little bit for it, is that component has to be disabled. Okay, and that might mean not just pulling a circuit breaker, but putting a collar on the circuit breaker so it can't inadvertently be reset. And that's the reason if we got a nav light that doesn't work, we don't know why it doesn't work. We can make the assumption that there's just a burned out bulb, but there could also be a short in that wire, and we don't want to have that thing turn to the on position if we got a short out there.
Yeah, that would be very bad. So we're in area of operation 3 now, air traffic controller clearances and procedures. I'm assuming we've walked through our flight plan with you. We've talked through the oral. I'm assuming we're still not at the plane yet, but you're going to talk about some stuff. You're going to have to see me demonstrate, I guess, at the airplane that I can copy the clearance and that I can repeat that clearance back. This mostly probably radios, but that's part A. Task A is the radio conversation. Anything that applicants need to be worried about, Wally, or what are you going to do as it relates to this? Or are you just observing and making sure they know how to talk?
No, and I'll do the clearance in the briefing room. I'll say, okay, let's do a little role playing. You are you, and I'm ATC. So go ahead and call me for the clearance to wherever. And so they'll play the game. Hooks ground, Skyhawk 123 Alpha Bravo. Like to pick up our IFR clearance to wherever. And I'll give it to them. Okay, you're cleared to the so-and-so airport via the Stick 8 departure, Dolly transition, climb and maintain 2,000, expect 8,000 10 minutes after departure. And I'll give them a clearance. And then we have to be very careful that I'll have to tell them, look, if we get out there in the real world, we're really in the airplane, and my clearance to you in the briefing room was turn right heading 270, and we get out there and ATC gives us runway heading, obviously we got to adhere to ATC. So a lot of times what I will say in the briefing room, I will say fly heading assigned by tower, and that kind of it doesn't implant any expectation bias or anything like that.
Yeah, I can see an applicant being nervous about that sort of stuff. Being hey, they told me this, you told me that, you're the man in charge, what do I do here? That could trip things up for sure.
Right.
Okay, I think there's tools built for it. I think there's cheat sheets. I think that's on every IFR knee board in the world, and this is holding procedures, entries, all that stuff. I have to assume you're going to make them hold at some point. Are you making them talk through it in the oral component, or are we going to wait and just exhibit those skills in the airplane?
I typically wait till we're in the airplane, but yeah, we're going to hold. We're definitely going to hold, and it might be an unpublished hold. And this is where I mix things up. We may hold as published after a missed approach.
Wait a second, Wally. I read your gouge, and your gouge said you do the same hold all the time. You can't mix it up, can you?
Well, yeah, it's adds a little, keeps me awake. So
yeah, you don't remember because you did thousands of them, but mine was 10 miles west of DZ. So 10 miles DME west of DZ. Everything else was standard, and man, I had never done that, so I was scared to death on flying and figuring out how to make that hold on the fly. I was so prepared to do the published hold at Navasota. We went east. It was a very interesting, for a guy like me, little flight time, right? It was very interesting to have all these things thrown at me. And applicants, you just got to be ready. You got to be able to hold anywhere, anytime, based on directions from ATC. And I think, although it was a good day, it was a crazy day for me mentally, but it made me a better pilot. I realized that I had to be ready. And when I fly with my family in IMC, I feel ready, right? I'm not too concerned that I can't do something that they ask me to do. But
yeah,
it was a great day.
Yeah, well, holding is something that I think everybody gets a little anxiety over, because if you're holding, um, it's it's usually not good, you know. So something's going on. There's a reason that you're holding. Maybe might be saturation from ATC. They can't let you in the airspace. It might be weather. I mean, that's the one we think about mostly, but there could be a whole string of reasons to hold. Maybe the airport. Now that if there's VIP movement going on, before an election or something, and they're running a little bit late, you may not be able to get into your destination, or you may not be able to just get into the airspace. Could be a disabled airplane on a runway. So there's lots of reasons to hold. But I will say this, when we do the hold, we have recommended holding entry procedures for the hold, and the ACS states that the applicant must use the recommended entry procedure, whether it be parallel, teardrop, or direct. So, if you go and you really kind of mess it up, but you finally find your way into the hold, that doesn't meet the standard.
Yeah, man, I struggled with that too. And I think it's one of those things that you study and you learn, but you need to know those things. And I think you gave some practical stuff when we were on pause last time around, but it's the easiest way to get there is what you said. If you remember, we were talking about how to get into the hold. It's almost always the easiest thing to do, meaning the least amount of turning. And if you can just think about that, it's just the least amount of turning.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like driving to Taco Bell. I mean, if you're going to get in your car and drive to Taco Bell, you're probably going to go the easiest way to get there. You're not going to drive through the neighborhood and make 45 turns and hit, 18 stop signs. You're going to get on the least amount of turns. So when you hit the holding fix, just look at it and say, okay, there are three ways I can get into this hold. I can go direct. So if I went direct, what would I have to do? I would have to do this and this. Okay, if I did a teardrop, I would have to do this. If I did parallel, I wouldn't even have to turn. Okay, well, you got your answer. It's a parallel entry.
Now, you've done, again, hundreds of instrument check rides, and as a flight school owner, I get to participate in a lot of debriefs, and I've seen the good, and I have seen the bad. But you use an electronic flight bag. You have a track log. What as we wrap up this part 2 or 1.5 of part 1, what's the craziest looking track log you've ever seen on a holding pattern that was part of a check ride?
Yeah, I've seen lots of circles, but probably the craziest I've seen is someone trying to intercept a Victor airway, and literally it looks like S-turns going across the Victor airway. And I'm just sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, what is going on here? And usually the next time when the applicant comes back to me in a week or so, they've got it figured out.
Yeah, I think we all make over adjustments as private pilots when we're trying to land, and I think as new instrument students, we all overcorrect and chase that needle. We keep turning until it gets to a center, and then we realize, well, shucks, we're a half a mile on the other side of the line now, and it's swung the other way. So
right.
Something we all do. If you're out there listening and you're working on your instrument, you will learn how to control that airplane better, and that's the process of learning. And if you see a big S-turn that gets straighter over time, that tells you that learning has occurred. So we are at the point, we're about halfway through the ACS. We're going to talk next time about areas of operation 4, flight by reference of instruments. I think this is the meat. This is the flying portion. I think I see it way too often, Wally, that people spend so much time on the flying that they forget the book work. And I would think a student, me too, as an applicant, I thought shooting that ILS and holding glide slope and tracking it all the way down to the runway lights where I saw the runway environment and I memorized that stuff. I thought that was the most important thing. But at the end of the day, flying instrument really in IMC, that's not what we're worried about. That last portion, that one approach, that one precision approach is not the be all end all. Would you agree?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many, there's so many things in between that we usually skip over, or just, I do spend a lot of time talking about, well, not a lot, but I do talk about non-radar environments, how to make position reports and that sort of thing. And that is, I would say in general, that's probably a weak link in the whole, the ground portion. And, some people may say, well, yeah, I've never had to make a non-radar position report. Well, if you start flying internationally, you will. And, there's a format for it. And it's pretty important to get it right.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot next time on the next episode about the instrument check ride and about how to prepare for that instrument check ride. And when you meet that DPE at the airplane and go fly, there's a lot to it. As always, thanks for listening to the show, and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.